The group tour leader voice. I wasn't ever a teacher, but
I had practice this morning. I love it.
So, and this question says, how did it play out? So,
I can't.
ask her.
Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here, and specifically to not have to wear a mask. It's so good to see your faces. This is the first public forum I've had not masked, so
I think we're
This is
all,
great.
yeah.
I know I'm not alone, but it's really nice.
Yeah.
So
It is. Brings a little more delight to the day.
I agree.
All right, Jason, so we've met. I'm Mary, the
Nice to see you
chair
again.
of the HRA board. We're going to do introductions and then we'll begin with the questions.
Great.
I'm Chris Skilden, local resident, community member. I'm also a contractor and HRA board member.
Great. Good to meet you.
Chris O'Brien, board member, retired executive, moved here full-time in 2016.
Congratulations.
Lawrence Doe, community member, board member, retired building contractor.
Okay.
I'm Stacy Harkins, a Cook County Commissioner. Ann Sullivan, Cook County Commissioner. And then over to Beth.
Hi, Beth Dross, Director of the Cook County Grand Range EDA.
Well, nice to meet all of you and see a couple of you in person.
And we have one more.
And Bill Gabler is also on the
Yes.
phone.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, I am on the phone. I am also now in my zero gravity recliner, which is like a lazy boy on steroids. I have a total ice pack around my knee, and my feet are above my heart, and so that's why I'm not a rotating person. But I can hear it.
That's a good excuse, Bill.
Bill had knee
surgery,
replacement.
yeah.
So.
Healing well, I hope. Yeah, he mentioned on the first interview that he was having
Oh,
that, so-
right. Yep, yep. And you've met Jane.
Yes.
Who's busy multitasking at the moment. So, Jason, we have 16 questions,
Sure.
which is the same number that we had in the first round.
Okay.
And we got through those in the time allotted. So just so you know that, we have about the same amount of time.
Okay.
And we're going to take turns, the board members, the HRA board members are going to take turns asking you the questions. And then time for any questions you might have after that. But we'll begin with Chris Gildem asking the first question.
Jason, why do you want to be the first executive director of Cook County Housing and Redevelopment Authority?
Probably should have anticipated that question, Chris. I want to be in this role for a couple of reasons. One, the truth is that my wife and I both love this community, and it just so happens we're at a place in our lives where this sort of a move makes sense. We moved to Lake County, just on Highway 1 between Finland and Silver Bay last year because remote work made that possible. And we knew that we loved living on the North Shore, and we do. We've always had a goal of actually moving this direction, but it hasn't been possible. And in part because the job opportunities just weren't present at the time. So one, it's just a function of timing. That we've been looking this way for quite a while, since we've been married. Actually, it's about 9 years. And two, I'm really excited about what could be done in this role. My experience in Duluth and other experiences, work experiences, have, I think, well equipped me to tackle this. And I've been in 2 positions before where I have started things that didn't exist or was the first guinea pig of a certain role. So I know what that's like, and I have no illusions about the complications and challenges of that, but I'm up for the task. So I think in short, Chris, one, we want to be here. We've been looking to be here. And two, this seems to be a really wonderful fit for a reason to come.
Can you share with us how you went about preparing for this finalist interview?
Sure. I asked my wife to ask me some questions last night. She's very good. She's a therapist, so she's very good at that. That was the primary way, honestly. I trust her and I trust her responses. I've been paying attention to the real estate market in this community for quite some time, so the preparation for me probably wasn't nearly as arduous maybe as other folks that are interested.
So when you seek a new position, what attributes do you look for in an organization? And what kind of organizational culture would you want the HRA to have?
That's a good question. Culture is an interesting thing right now with remote work. That has shifted pretty dramatically in some sense. And my understanding is the HRA is really a party of one for the time being. So I guess whatever culture I have is what I would be bringing to the HRA. But insofar as that, the representation, or I think, of what the HRA is for the community and interacting with the board, I think it needs to be a culture of openness, conversation, as well as action. There's such a thing in local government as analysis paralysis, or the perfect being the enemy of the good. And I think that the need is such that that is not something we want to delve into. So I think understanding what the opportunities are and having a realistic idea of what the challenges are, which there are many, that I think is ingrained in the culture, because at least that would be my desire, is to have an understanding of what really the goal is, but also having a dialogue continuously with the board, with the community, to help them to educate and help them understand what we're trying to achieve. Honestly, a lot of my role has turned into, and other past roles have turned into public education components. There's often a disparity with what people think needs to be done or how things work in the reality. And so I find that most people are reasonable when they understand all of the pieces of the puzzle. And most of the time, they just don't have all the pieces because they don't do this every day. So I think, again, a culture of being open and having conversations with people, but also being task and solutions oriented is important. You had, Mary, sorry, there was another component of that question, and I got stuck on the culture.
The attributes that you would look for in an organization, but I think...
Generally, those same things, I hope.
Yeah.
I hope.
Like.
Yeah. Yeah, we can sum it up there.
I think you got it.
Cool.
How would you work with the HRA board to develop relationships and trust throughout the county?
Honestly, I'd be relying on the board because you have the relationships and the experience here. Those things take time. Trust takes time. Presumably you're in these seats because someone trusts you and because you have the experience needed to be in these seats. So part of it is getting to know the board, where obviously Lawrence and Chris, you both talked about your contracting experience. So there's definitely some leaning into you two for those things in this area. I have relationships with builders and developers in Duluth and the metro and outstate, but I don't here. Maybe one, Cindy Crawford, I think, is the only person that with the contracting. I work with her on a project in Duluth. But anyway, the point is that the relationship with the board is really, from my perspective, my experience, the board helps create and cast the vision. The executive director serves the pleasure of the board to carry that out. And sometimes that means the executive director having challenging conversations about this is why this is really difficult, or things to think about, and bringing context to the conversation. So that's my role, is to help bring experience and industry context to the situation. But I also think I can't do that without tapping into your knowledge of the area, the community, the people, the stakeholders. Like, there's a lot of that needs sifting through, and I would rely on the board to help do that and cast that direction. Does that answer your question, Lawrence?
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
What experience do you have with public accountability?
Oh, sorry, your commissioner is not. Oh, okay.
Right.
We went back to Chris.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll see it happening.
Yeah, I'm going to notice that. Why are we skipping them? That's not fair. It's going to call you out, but
So I'll just clarify that for you. They are the county board, Stacy is the county board liaison,
oh, okay.
and Ann is the alternate liaison, so that's why they're
Okay,
here with
got
us
it.
No authority.
Thank you. No authority.
today, right now.
I'm glad you're here anyway. Sorry, Chris. Public accountability.
Yeah, what experience do you have with public accountability?
Quite a bit. I have 87,000 bosses right now. That's how I view it anyway. I think that to some extent I'm accountable to each of them, while also recognizing and tempering that with practical reality. I actually have 5 bosses right now that I report to because my role is rather unique. The one that I'm currently in was created 2.5 years ago. I'm the first person ever in it, like I was commenting on before. So depending on the project and the initiative, I report to the mayor or the CAO or the board, the HRA board or the DETA board or city council. So not to mention my director and deputy director. So I have a lot of people that potentially I'm working with. That's internal accountability, but the board and the council and the other board that I currently report to all represent the people and public accountability. I think customer service is the #1 important thing for local government that gets lost. So I think part of that means when I get a phone call from an interested citizen, I was going to say this last week, I was on vacation. It's all a blur. Right before I left for vacation, it happened 3 times in 1 week where I had people who received my number or my name from someone and asked, hey, you should talk to Jason about this, because they had ideas for housing, or one gal is trying to do a housing project in Duluth and she's hung up on actually an appraisal issue. Don't know how she got my name and information, but she did. And I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, trying to walk her through it, worked with her bank. The point I'm trying to make is I can't do that all of the time because it's not a good use of time. But I think that people deserve to know that if you can help them, you will, or find someone who can. Because I think we are accountable. They're paying our paychecks in public service. So again, there's discretion that needs to be had. There are obvious things that you should delegate. But sometimes it's really important to let people know, hey, I'm going to help you insofar as I can, and then I'm going to find someone who can. And sometimes that doesn't mean yes. Honestly, a lot of the times it means no. But I don't think it should ever be no, period. It should be no, but what about this? Or no, but I think that this could help, or let's talk about this other thing. So yeah, I'm quite familiar with public accountability.
Can you provide an example in your professional life where you were able to work in an opportunistic rather than a planful way? And what was the opportunity and how did that play out?
Yes. Did you get a chance to receive the writing examples or sample? Okay, I was going to refer to that just briefly.
Sure.
In part of it, I made a mention about, I think I did, about housing or development being a reactionary or reactive industry, as opposed to, like, there's planning, but there's,
Yes, you did.
yeah. So the reason I mention that is because development generally, not only does it react to the market, so I think, like I said in the example, demand increases, supply tries to follow demand. Because if there's demand, there's money in it. That's typically markets, right? However, in government, we don't get to keep up quite as well. Usually, we lag a bit behind. And so I think that it's an example of being opportunistic is honestly every day working in housing development, it happens. We have, so I'll reframe. We have a comprehensive plan, and I believe Lake County does as well. And you have zoning ordinances, you have all of the plans. The governments have all of the plans. And they are usually, or not usually, sometimes and often well thought out and well informed. But what happens is reality steps in and says, hey, this isn't going to work, or hey, we queued up XYZ thing because we wanted it, and then the development market or construction market or whatever, the rate interest market says, sorry, we're not interested in that, but what about this? So I think a lot of development comes down to having and again, I think I mentioned or alluded to this, you need to have the goal clearly identified. And in this case, it's developing more housing. How you get there needs to adapt and change, because there are a lot of ways to get there. And right now, unfortunately, those are more expensive and more complicated than ever. But as long as the goal is understood, we have to be able to adapt and be open to it. So opportunism is, I think, critical in this environment we're talking about. One brief example, because that's what you asked for ultimately in my diatribe, sorry. One brief example is, oh gosh. Okay, so there's Lester Park Golf Course in Duluth, which is a legacy golf course, and it's a very contentious thing locally. I think the golf course was established in 1930. And it's 268 acres, and there are a lot of people, as you can imagine, who don't want to touch it. They want to keep it as a golf course. The reality is, so this is out of my wheelhouse, the public administration and the people who manage the parks operations recognized several years ago we can't sustain it. We have 2 golf courses in Duluth right now, public golf courses. There are 5 in the area. Can't sustain 2 of them. We need to consolidate and invest in one of them. It was decided basically the Lester Park Golf Course was the one that was less profitable, needed more work, all of those things, and we need to figure out what to do with it. So there was a bit of matchmaking. Well, I suppose there's an intuitive answer here. We have a bunch of land. We need a lot of housing. So the opportunism was, I think, in and we'll see, I guess I'm knocking on wood wherever there's real wood around here, that it works out. But council has approved through about a year of work on my part with councilors and commissioners and board members to take the southern, about 38 acres of the property, which is closest to utilities, closest to the road and the freeway, for development of mixed income, mixed use housing and some small scale commercial. So the reality is there was a lot of pushback politically, and there was a lot of education and conversations. I mean, this has been talked about for 6 years. And finally, I guess I was given the keys to try to make development happen last February, and then this last fall, council approved us moving forward. So the opportunity is, hey, there's matchmaking. That's usually how it works. The goal, the resources, and figuring out where to plug and play.
Is it, I mean, you probably answered this to some extent, but there was, you mentioned there was some blowback to the change from the original purpose of the golf course. I mean, can you describe a little more about how you dealt with that blowback?
Yes. In part, there was a lot of, the blowback was from multiple parties, but the two most prominent were folks that want to protect the property for environmental reasons, to keep it green, to not disturb that much acreage. And the second was the Duluth Public Golf Club, basically, that formed as a result of these conversations. Those were the two loudest speaking, antagonists to the effort. There are some people, I mean, there's only so much managing you can do. If we recognize that we can't afford to sustain it, we can't, in some sense, the city can't continue to maintain the existing park infrastructure without additional resources. So to make this into another park of sorts didn't make financial sense. It was just irresponsible. So what it came down to, Chris, is essentially more education, more context, hearing them, because that was really important. And in fact, I scaled it back from 50 acres that was previously proposed and reduced it by about 13 acres, 12, 13 acres, so that the clubhouse in north, the remaining 86% of the property, would be available for public use and accessible. So it involves compromise. It involves a lot of conversations. It's never easy to get there because, of course, there's a lot of emotional and sentimental attachment to something like that. And people really get tied to land in senses of space. But I'd say, while that all was true, the fact that we have such a need for housing right now is a really good and strong argument to make. And the fact that that was very strongly highlighted and outlined by the community in our comprehensive plan update. We did one in 2018. It was very clear, unanimously, that housing and affordability was one of the top two concerns of the city. So there's something called NIMBYism. I'm sure you've heard of that term. It's alive and well, I'll let you know. It's still there. And I think it isn't to use a battering ram, but I think one of the really useful tools that I've been able to employ recently is to say, we understand that you maybe don't want it here, or you think that this should be used for this, but also you were part of the resounding call for more housing, and we have to find somewhere. Can you meet us here? Because we can do it well, and we're going to try to be intentional and protect the things that matter, but we don't have a lot of other options. And if you approach with that level of, or try to be as reasonable as and accommodating as possible, people generally respond pretty well. You're welcome.
So what can you tell us about the differing housing needs in various parts of Cook County and among different demographic groups, and how would you address the differences?
Can you clarify, address the differences? How do you mean?
Well, so we have geographic areas, we have demographic groups, we have a lot of needs. So how would you go about addressing those needs?
Build more housing.
Build more housing. Perfect. Maybe like first steps. Sorry,
it was a little tongue-in-cheek of me, but it's kind of funny. I thought a little bit about that question yesterday or this morning. The short answer really is build more housing. And if it was that easy, you wouldn't need this role or an HRA. Particularly here, I have long said if you can build housing in Duluth, you can build it anywhere. Well, I think if you can build housing here, you can really build it anywhere. And I say that because you're contending with all of Duluth's challenges, but also with the geographic and distribution and cost challenges that Duluth doesn't have. I mean, Duluth has those, but you have them, plus 50%. So the needs vary, yes. I'll put it this way. The biggest need is for more affordable housing, period. What affordable means changes from person to person. Generally speaking, in housing industry, and if you're talking HUD language or resources, affordable is something that's available to those earning 80% or less of the area median income. That's how it's defined often for program purposes. Again, that's a program. You talk to somebody who's working down the street and they may say, like, I don't care about that number. X $100 a month is what's affordable to me. I think the first steps to your point, Mary, one is to understand, and I think I wrote a little bit about this in that questionnaire. One is to understand what the real opportunities are. I see a few, honestly. So the last time I was in Grand Marais, which a few weeks ago, right before we left, we try to get up here for fun, believe it or not. This is our escape. We go further north, my family thinks we're nuts. One of the things I noticed, I kind of took a cruise of the city and then the outlying around the city, some areas, and I try to go down roads I've never been before. It drives my wife crazy sometimes. Trying to see what's available and what opportunities are. So off the cuff, there's I think an industrial park, a commercial park that the EDA had worked on. I think it's on the east side of town, if that's right. There are utilities there, at least some, and it's public ownership. There's an opportunity. The question is, how do you get a developer interested in what type of product needs and wants to be there? So I think the first steps are identifying some, for lack of a better phrase, low-hanging fruit like that, and figuring out who the stakeholders are and who the players need to be involved, and then setting the table. I don't think you can get the housing you need in Cook County without this is an all-hands-on-deck sort of moment, I think, honestly. I mean, it's the same in Duluth, but even more so here. I don't think you can get that housing without setting the table really well and making an easy yes for developers. There is so much competition right now for talent and for development time and for investment that you have to make a compelling story and make it easy for them to want to be here. I think I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was possible. I think that Grand Marais and Cook County, from Grand Portage to Schroeder, I think that there's a story to tell. And I think that people would have interest, but I think it's about getting the right people interested and, again, setting the table. And that could be queuing up a list, and I've done this in Duluth, a list of properties that are available, tax forfeit properties that the county manages, city properties, different township properties, seeing the development opportunities of those, what the zoning is, if it needs to change, if the zoning is accounts for or accommodates some creative housing uses. It's sort of a, forgive the phrase, but it's sort of an adapt or die moment for housing right now for a lot of communities. If you don't figure out a way to get people at the table and accommodate some of the needs, which is, some of them are, I should say, not atypical, but maybe not traditional, like pocket parks, or I'm working on a couple of those in Duluth right now. If you don't do that, you're missing out. And I do think it actually makes this a more attractive community, not to mention fills the housing needs. So that's a longer answer than build more housing, but I think generally that's true.
Very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Cook County housing challenges have evolved over many years and cannot be addressed overnight. That said, there is a need for near-term and long-term solutions. Please describe some short-term and long-term opportunities you would want to explore as our HRA director.
Lawrence, when you say short-term, can you unpack that a little bit? Like, how short-term are you thinking?
I think I'll let you figure that out.
I see what you did there.
Potential director, you figure that one
Okay,
out.
okay. All right, I'll take that. So when I think of shorter term, I'm thinking of months to a couple of years or something. Months, that's almost impossible. With new construction. That said, and I think I mentioned this, there's a seasonality for sure to this area. It's the same along the whole shore. I don't know to what extent this has been explored, but I would love to have conversations with some of the bigger let's say Odyssey Resort owners, other resort owners. So my understanding is that there's an influx of workers, and I think that, do you still have the J5 visa program? J1?
H2B and J1.
Okay, and that's still, okay. It's a great program. From what I understand, it's very helpful. I would love to get a better understanding of what that does to housing needs, because my assumption is that in the busier seasonal months from May to October, there's a sudden increase in demand for housing units, more temporary, seasonal, 6-month or whatever it is housing units. Those types of units are much more quick to build because they require a whole bunch of different things, and they're a lot simpler to construct, as opposed to, let's say that there's a need for 100 new single-family homes. That's a different topic. So I think short-term, it's to understand maybe there's some hidden assets that you already have and tap into those, but to do that, you have to have conversations with the people who own them and to figure out what their need is, and maybe there's some creative things that have already been done in other communities. Renting out, creating more like a lodging space and doing some retrofitting of existing facilities to make, again, like a lodging room type situation, which again, if you're going to rent it at a really affordable price, you'd be surprised what people are willing to, I don't say willing to live in, but will find comfortable and agreeable. There's a trend, actually, we just left San Francisco, there's a trend out in the West Coast with some of these bigger cities where they're actually having, I don't know if you've read about this, I'm not proposing that here, but it shows the need, where people are renting shared apartments with like 10 other people and shared community or kitchen space, and basically they're all on a lease together, and it's a boarding style apartment situation, and that's sheerly a function of affordability, costs, and remote work. So there are creative opportunities again, but I need to have a better understanding of what assets already exist here, and maybe there's some matchmaking. That's the short term, like the really short term. Shorter, mid, long term, lay out, get a really good understanding of what the community is willing to bring to the table. So if that's land, what the county and other communities feel about things like tax abatement or tax increment financing. Start talking with partners like Greater Minnesota Housing, Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, DEED, all the usual suspects that the EDA also has to work with. I should say gets to work with, sorry, I'll reframe that. The EPA, all of those things to really start laying a groundwork for development longer term. These things take years. Affordable tax credit projects can take 3 or 4 years, assuming they get funded. So I have no illusions about the complexities and time involved with this, but there are things you can do. I think you have to start these things sort of concurrent, and because they all have different time frames. You could do a market rate project in 12 months, but like I said, a 4-year affordable project, or if you're doing a historic tax credit project or a TIF project, like those all change the calculus a little bit. Not to mention we have a 6-month building season for, mostly for foundational work, and you can do it out in the wintertime. It's just a lot harder and not fun. So I think that's longer term. I hope we can get to a place where longer term is where it's not a luxury. Because right now I feel like long term almost feels like a luxury. Like we don't even have the capacity to think, well, what do we want to be in 15 years? It's like, well, what do we need 45, 50, whatever housing units in this community like tomorrow. Having said that, I think you can address that while still queuing up the rest. Because the goal is to get to a stable point where you're not in triage mode and where you're thinking about intentional, smart, efficient, sustainably designed developments. And that comes with time. And again, when you're in a meeting with a developer and you're saying, we would love you to incorporate PV solar systems and green energy systems and complete streets, they'll say, we would love to do that too, who's paying for it? And then you say, well, we have X amount of dollars, and you say, great, that gets you 25 units. So value engineering is alive and well as well, and that will get cut because right now the costs are so high. But I see a day where that's not the case, and I think that the dream and the vision is to get to a place where you can have those really intentional conversations where you can pick, like where this community can decide, no, we don't want that, or yes, we do want that, because you're in a position to do that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
How does this position represent a step forward in your career path? Where do you see yourself in
Huh. I think that this is a role that will challenge me in different ways. So my career, I was just actually promoted 2 weeks ago to the manager of my division at the city. Sort of kicking and screaming because there's just a lot going on. So despite that, I'm still here and I want to be here. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because my perspective of opportunity and career is a little different than maybe what you would expect or what the typical career path or ladder, so to speak, would be. If I was interested in money, I would stay in Duluth. Honestly, if that was the only driving factor. Of course, that is a factor, but that's not what's driving me. I think I'm more excited about what I could help do here and how I could grow personally and professionally than if I stayed in Duluth. And my wife is too. If she wasn't, I wouldn't be here either. Yeah, so I really think that the 5-year plan, I couldn't tell you what was going to happen. 2 years ago, I think everybody's 5-year plans kind of got thrown out the window. So that's a tough question to answer right now. But I don't really have 5-year plans. I look at opportunities as they present themselves and feel them out. And if they're a good fit and I can grow, then I pursue them. And if they're not, by the way, that's fine too. I believe in the work I'm doing currently. I believe that I'm helping make a difference. So there's no loss. I just think this is a more fun, unique opportunity to try.
You gave some examples of this before, but can you give us some examples of your experience in board relations and communications in your current and previous positions?
Yes. Well, I guess I'll keep this one brief. I relate to the board all the time. So I meet with, I suppose it depends. Again, I meet with the board, the HRA board. I report to the board on any HRA specific projects that we're doing. So I work directly under the exec director of the Duluth HRA. And so I work closely with her, and she basically has me going off and doing all the development-y things so she can focus on the more administrative things. Because the Duluth HRA is really heavily focused on Section 8 programs and a lot of, they own and operate, I believe, 3,300 units of housing. Yeah, so as you can imagine, I think the staff is like 40-something people at the HRA, but that's a lot of maintenance people, and so there's a lot of administration that has to happen. So I get to have fun and get housing built. I feel bad for them. But I have, so in my work with the executive director, I write a board report every month, and then I'm at every board meeting answering questions, fielding questions. I represent the HRA in various public meetings, as well as the city, as well as the EDA, depending on the day. And then I'm meeting with counselors in council session or offline. That's become more frequent as we're trying to carry forward big initiatives like the Housing Trust Fund or the Lester Park Golf Course that I talked about earlier. So yeah, I have quite a bit of communication with board members. And as I get to know them, frankly, I've been working with a couple of them, especially in the EDA, for years now. And it's a great working relationship, and they know they can send people my way if anybody has questions about property or development or what have you. So that happened this morning.
Please discuss your experience developing strategic plans. How did you engage stakeholders in the process? How did you measure progress towards objectives?
I've done strategic planning for a number of different things, typically for initiatives or programs. So one example is that the Housing Trust Fund that I mentioned that was approved by council in November, and we launched the application for it at the end of January. That was a years-long conversation, and again, I sort of was handed the keys last year, and the mayor said, let's figure out how to do this. And I said, okay. Turns out it's more complicated than you think, which it usually is. I shouldn't have been surprised. But part of that conversation was talking with counselors about what a housing trust fund is. So some education components, of course, like I said. and then helping, getting a lot of feedback from the development community. I called contractors and developers and builders and asked for their input, what would be useful for them. One of the things I strive to do is make whatever we do useful. I don't particularly care about the fanfare or about how it sounds. If it's not going to be used, then it's useless by definition. So I have a strong interest in making sure that the folks who are the intended end user of something have buy-in and want to use it. And honestly, they appreciate being involved with the conversation. And it doesn't always, as a representing the public and being the manager of public resources, I'm always trying to straddle the line of providing enough incentive to get them interested, but not too much that we're handing out free money. And that's a very difficult balance to strike because the market is all over the place and so complicated right now. But that's the ambition that I have with these types of programs. So I worked, again, with the Housing Trust Fund example, I worked with many people. Created a partnership with LISC. Are you familiar with LISC at all? I'm still working with National LISC on this. They're a partner of the Housing Trust Fund now, and I helped them do some fundraising for their pot of that money. So I've done various strategic plans on various initiatives and RPs and programs. What I have learned is, like I kind of alluded to earlier, the best laid plans of mice and men is very applicable here. And strategic plans, you need to have a plan, but you also need to adapt. To your earlier question, Chris, opportunism is real, and you need to be able to have some flexibility in that plan. And if it's not working, you need to change it. I've been advocating, and actually while I was gone, I believe the Planning Commission just approved some changes to the zoning code because we had created a specific special use permit to allow for a cottage village concept. But in practice, when we started doing it, we found some hiccups. That's how it works. You try to do something to be accommodating or to make things happen, and then you realize, oh, we didn't think of this or this or this. So the point is, you get it out there, you see how it goes, but you have to be willing to reassess. Not because someone's complaining, but because it doesn't work well. There will always be people who want more or don't like it. That's fine. But if it's actually not functioning as well as it could, or it's not achieving the goal, then you need to bring it back and take another look.
So, say just a little bit more about how you would chart success with this.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Plan. That's okay.
I think success is measured by outcomes, and maybe counterintuitively by failure. So the Rebuild Duluth program was something that I championed a couple of years ago, 2019. It's a bit of a blur since 2019, actually. I think it was 2019. And that was a free lot program in Duluth, taking municipally owned properties and providing them for free for new housing, infill housing development. It was a great experience. We got exposure nationally. There were people that were applied from Mexico City and New York and California, and so that was great. And actually, the New York Times called me and asked about it, which I was, how did you even hear about this? The point is, that's all fun, but if it wasn't useful or practical, then it didn't matter. And we learned that there were a lot of things. We learned a lot through that program. And so what we ended up doing is going back and overhauling it. And now we've stripped it down and put it under the Housing Trust Fund program as part of that program. So I think the success there was some housing units were built and are being built through that program. So that's the outcome portion. But the success is also the failure in learning how to change it to make it usable. You obviously want to avoid that as much as possible, but that's life.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tell us about a time when there was a challenge or a conflict with either partners, finances, or the public on a project. And how did you find a resolution, and what lessons did you learn from that experience?
The public's always on board, Lawrence. So I'm not fooling anybody here. Okay, so aside from the Lester Park Golf Course, I'll use another example. This is before my role. So before I was in this new role that I'm in, I was a senior economic developer for the city and still doing a lot of housing projects because there wasn't another person doing them, and I love housing, so I kind of squeezed in and started doing them. One of them was for a 14-story project downtown that is a market rate $75 million apartment building, mixed use. So if you're familiar with Duluth at all, the Voyager Lake Walk-In is sort of a classic old motel downtown. Right next, it's across the street from the new Essentia Hospital building. And right now there's a big crater there because the buildings were demolished. When I brought that to council, we were supporting it with tax increment financing, and quite a bit of it, because it's such an expensive project. Again, it was $70 million at the time. Now it's 75 or 6. Price creep continues to happen. And the council chambers were full of people who were protesting it because they did not want us assisting or subsidizing a market rate project, because the affordability crisis was really starting to peak at that time. I think it was 2018. Gosh, that long. Wow. Been working on that for a while. It's still not built, but we're starting in April. I remember how frustrated a lot of people were that were there, and a lot of them, there's a 3-minute block of time for people to come speak before the council, and so there were a lot of people that had signed up to do that. On the one hand, it was pretty disheartening because you work really hard on this type of thing, and the public, all you're seeing is the margin of people who come in that are upset. You're not seeing the people who think it's a good. I mean, that's politics, and that's public work a lot of the time. But what I was able to do subsequently, after I realized how upset people were, council approved it. It was a contentious council meeting. There was a lot of back and forth. But council also realized that we had 2 vacant buildings, a derelict motel, and $75 million on the line. So it was a bit of a no-brainer from that perspective, and especially from a property tax perspective down the road, et cetera. So in short, I was able to, after the fact, meet with Affordable Housing Coalition, which is a strong contingent of folks in the community who meet monthly to champion and advocate affordable housing. And I've attended those meetings since, and it was really helpful to explain to them. They didn't know this at the time. Again, context and education. They didn't realize that Duluth it was very difficult to get people to build in Duluth. People didn't think that Duluth had enough money that people would pay those rents. And so what I helped them understand is we have to prove to the market and investment community that Duluth is worth building in. And this is a way to get there. And so it took, I worked on the Kenwood Village ND project, the Lakewood View project, a lot of these market rate projects that we assisted with TIF and other resources. And now that that's happened, we have a lot more interest. But it took showing that it will be absorbed, that there's a need for it, and that these projects can do really well. When they heard me explain that, suddenly the light bulb sort of went on for many of them. They said, "Oh, why didn't anybody tell us about this?" Well, we didn't know, and there wasn't time and all of those things. But I have found that, and there were some people who are still upset. Of course, there always will be. But by and large, when we help them understand, this is why, this is part of the thinking behind this. And now, unfortunately, it worked out when we can show, see, that's why we did it, because look at all the interest we have, right? If that didn't happen, we would have been a lot harder conversation to have. But I think that that's not dissimilar from the situation that Cook County faces as well.
Let's imagine at the end of the first year as the executive director, you haven't met all the goals this board established. How would you deal with that particular situation?
Well, first of all, Chris, it shouldn't be a surprise. So if I don't meet all of the goals that are established, I would hope you'd be well aware of it before the end of the first year. You would be aware of it because communication is really important. And managing expectations is also pretty critical. I think both ways. One of the things I think I mentioned in the first interview is wanting to get a better understanding of what the expectations are from the board. This is, from as I understand it, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding the sort of the situation, this is a one-person HRA for now, right, who is trying to help housing get done in Cook County. That's the dramatic oversimplification of the process involved to do that. There are a lot of questions about resources like access to attorney staff, administrative assistance. There's a lot. I mean, writing one grant can take a month to do it well, to get the money. So it shouldn't take a month total. Depends on the grant. Anyhow, the point is, I would want to make sure before those goals are finalized that there's a conversation about what I think is realistic. I have no concerns about my work ethic or my going to bat or my capacity, but I would have concerns if the board established things that are just unattainable. Because then we're setting each other up for failure, and that doesn't help the community. I mean, I would much rather under-promise and over-deliver to the community than set their expectations high and lose trust right away. Any meaningful development or housing is going to take a couple of years. That's just the reality. Because if you could get a shovel ground tomorrow, it's 18 months for a multifamily project, and you're not going to put a shovel in the ground tomorrow. It's getting closer, maybe a month and a half. So yeah, I think that that's really important. But again, ultimately, if the goals weren't met and the board was, I guess in this case, if the board was adamant about wanting certain things done, I would really try to communicate whether or not I think that's attainable. And if the board was staunch about it, I would do my best and then explain why it didn't work out, or what I think we need to change, or what we could do better, and then see what the board feels.
So based on your experience working in housing, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that people have about housing challenges and strategies for development, for addressing those challenges?
I think people often assume housing developers just take away boatloads of cash with no risk. Sometimes they do. Most of the time they don't. I think what people don't recognize is that there's a lot of time and energy and money and risk spent trying to get a project off the ground. And there's no guarantee that the economy doesn't tank in the middle of it, or there's no guarantee that it's going to absorb how they want it to, or that it's going to perform how they want it to. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is, one, how developments really work, and then two, not understanding the real costs and complications of construction. Everybody, I'm sure everybody has seen news clips and the media saying, well, for most recently, gas is $6 a gallon. I was just in California and I filled a car up. Gas was $6 a gallon. It was pretty crazy. But the impact that has on individuals' wallets, that hits home. But I think what gets lost in translation is, what does that do to shipping? To get SIPs from China, or whatever materials from pine from Georgia. Like, what does that do to the train of trucks needed to bring things to Grand Marais and Cook County, Minnesota? It has an impact. PVC pricing going up has an impact. Like, all of these things that people don't see because they're not in that space creates a more complicated, more especially now, a more expensive project. And so people, I think, don't quite understand why it's so hard to build a house for $180,000. Like, why are all these builders trying to walk away with, $100,000 in their pocket for a starter home? Well, I think they'd be happy to walk away with $100,000 in their pocket to build a $250,000 home, but that's not what's happening. Unless there's a secret, you can tell me if there's a secret I'm missing. I'd love to know. But my experience, and I have some friends who are builders, and that's just not the world we're working in. So, again, education is a part of that, and there's a propensity for people to hear something and glom onto it for a long time, and it may not be true any longer. So they may have heard one story about somebody getting rich off of some community in Illinois or whatever, and then of course they extrapolate that to all developers, or they hear that construction or lumber has gone back down. Yeah, but then it went back up again. So it depends on when you catch people. But I think to the extent we can help inform and educate, we should do that. You're welcome.
What are steps that we, as board members, can take to help you be successful?
You could donate large sums of money to the HRA of Cook County. Aside from that, I think that, well, like I mentioned before, connecting me with the stakeholders that really have a say or are impacted or can help with this, that's really important. I have, driving around, you can get some sense, and you look at some of the bigger employers, they're going to have a vested interest. The hospital system's going to have a vested interest. But I think helping me navigate the lay of the land until I really understand the community and get to build those relationships which I'm excited to do because, like I said in my note, I think my wife and I do want to live in Cook County. So it would serve two purposes, getting to know people and then also helping this role. Aside from the relationship piece, Mary, I think the thing that this board can do is help galvanize community support for projects. If I brought to the board a proposal for a development of a multifamily project in downtown Grand Marais with mixed use and Airbnb component to help cash flow the project, just off the top of my head, something I've toyed with a little bit. I would really, if the board was supportive of it, what I would need is the board to be supportive of the community. You have friends and neighbors, you're out there, you live here, you know people. And so this is only successful if we're all in it together, and we can all disagree. And again, I would serve the board's pleasure, and you can all disagree. I've seen enough of that happen before, and usually it works out. That's what voting's for. But whatever the course we would take, I would just count on your support to help the community understand and bring them along insofar as we can. You're welcome.
The last question.
Last one? Okay. I suppose 4 rounds, that makes sense.
Are there, yeah. Are there any questions that we didn't ask you that we should have? I'll say it again.
Oh,
Are there any questions that we didn't ask that we should have asked?
is there anything you want to ask that wasn't on your list? That's my question.
We aren't able to add any questions other than what's on our list.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
This is more like maybe we don't know what we don't know.
Is there-
Right? Is
Yes,
that-
yeah, something you want to inform us that we didn't think to ask.
Nothing's striking me. You had some great questions. I could talk about housing all day. I do talk about housing all day, so I honestly.
Okay, that's a good answer.
That's okay. So then, Jason, do you have any questions that you want to ask us?
Yes, a few.
Okay.
Great.
Oh, wait, before we go to that, Bill, would you like to add anything at this time?
I think he's floating in 0G, he said.
He's in his,
Blood rushed to his head.
Fall asleep.
not, we'll check back in
All right.
with him in a little
Well,
while. Oh, there you are.
I was trying to unmute.
Good cover. Yeah.
Okay. Anything to say? You can't ask more questions, but is there anything you would like clarified or anything at this time?
Not for me.
No? Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Thanks, Bill.
I just wanted to remember to check in with you. Okay, then
Thank you.
you can ask us your questions.
Okay, great. When are you looking for this role to be filled, aside from, I mean, if it's ASAP, it's ASAP, but is there a time particularly you're thinking?
Well, the timeline I think that we created was, it might have been April 1st if possible.
Okay.
But we did then have a little shuffling around in our original timeline, so, but yes, as soon as possible is.
Okay. I mentioned it kind of briefly in the question time. What is the access to things like the county attorney staff or administrative staff? There's a lot of, I mean, I do a lot of contracts and negotiation stuff now, but I'm fortunate to have an attorney to help keep me out of prison. So is there staff here that is accessible for the HRA or?
Well, and James would be the best one, Ann maybe, Ann is the current chair of the county board.
Yeah, and Stacy
Stacy.
can step in as well too, but we do have a county attorney that reviews contracts for different organizations, and so that is something she's very familiar with.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
and I know, like, for example, the county attorney cannot advise the EDA, because
Correct.
the EDA is not of the county, but the HRA is of the
going to
county.
be.
So it's a separate public body, corporate and politic that was created by special legislation, the EDA.
Is it a Grand Marais and Cook County
It's
EDA?
Cook County,
Yes.
Grand Marais joint powers.
Got it.
That's
That's
the
why.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
I didn't realize it was also Grand Marais. I thought it was, okay.
yeah. So the HRA should be able to work with
And
county
the
staff.
city of Grand Marais is going to give its authority to our HRA.
Yeah, it has, the city of Grand Marais has HRA authority, but they haven't used it for 25 years or 40 years or.
They don't have an HRA, right?
They haven't done anything with
But
it.
they're
So
going to transfer their authority.
they're just gonna do a resolution to,
Got it.
yeah,
St. Louis County does that for Duluth HRA too sometimes.
yeah.
Okay. That is helpful. Thank you. Okay, so. Oh, practical question. I hope they're all practical. Logistics maybe is a better word. I have been looking at, I wasn't joking, I try to keep a close eye on the real estate market up here for a lot of reasons. I'm slowly trying to pull my parents up here to retire. They're getting close. I think I almost have them. But in perusing what's not available, of course, as you all know, the challenge is there's nothing available.
For housing.
Yeah, correct.
Correct.
Yeah. It's almost remarkable if it wasn't so frustrating and problematic. So, and Mary, we talked about this a little bit in the first interview. I had a question about the expectations for. I presume that the HRA is going to sit in the county seat in this building. But is there one of the challenges with that? Of course, is right now I'm about an hour away, and I have the ability to work mostly remotely with Duluth in my job. I mean, I did it for 2 years. It's worked out pretty well. I don't want to do that longer term in this role, but until I'm able to find housing, I also don't want to drive 10 hours a week to work. So I just wanted to see if that's an expectation that's going to be set, because if it is, that's complicating. And frankly, whomever else is interested in this role, I don't know what they would do aside from wait 10 months to find a house and then start. So I just wanted to make sure that that's something that I'm transparent about. Actively wants to be in this community, but that may take time until I build a bunch of housing and I can buy one of them, which I can't do because there's a conflict of interest. So
We might know a guy that you could talk to.
you might know a guy.
Yeah, don't be so pessimistic about it from here, but there's stuff out there that's honest.
There's some projects that are in,
You know
on the
what?
burner,
Okay.
so.
I talked with a few people. Every time I've come up here, I've talked with, people that have been, whether waiting a table or pouring me a beer or whatever, and asked them, how did you find housing here? I've heard that from so many people, like, I knew a guy, or I had to find a guy who knew a guy, and I managed his Airbnb, and he rents to me for cheap up the shore a little bit. And I'm like, gosh, you got to know a guy in Grand Marais to get a house.
His name is Guido.
Guido, I know that guy. A little sketchy. So,
Actually, I think, we are all fully aware of that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as you have talked about meeting stakeholders and creating relationships,
Mhm.
that we would certainly look at this as a hybrid kind of a in-person and virtual. And actually, the office for the HRA won't likely be in this building,
Oh, okay.
but shared space with the
Hey,
EDA.
Beth.
We
Where's the
haven't,
EDA?
we haven't,
Within
there,
walking distance.
It's a
of
couple
this
blocks
building.
down the hill.
Just down the hill.
it's right on the
Oh.
corner of this Fifth Avenue West and Highway 61, the log building that's right
Oh.
above the Fisherman's Daughter.
That's the EDA
The
location.
EDA is in the upper level of that building, and we haven't signed a lease or made any commitments, but there's been conversation
Okay.
since the EDA moved there last summer that it could be shared space for the two.
That would make a bunch of sense. And I think I mentioned this before, Beth, in the first interview. Housing development is becoming an economic development problem. And so I would really need to tap your experience, your resources. There'd be a lot of collaborating I think we would have to do, or that I would want to do,
Yeah.
because this is, I've talked with your hospital administrator and I've talked with other employers in town, and I know that this is a challenge for them.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So in other words, that may make good sense. Okay. I'm cognizant of time. I have 30 seconds or something left. I just want to make sure that while I have you, I had a third question. It's escaping me. Okay. Oh, well. I would love it if you could ask. I know you can't. I'm not used to the formal process, but that makes good sense. Serving as soon as possible. Yeah, okay. As long as, so Mary, I think I'm hearing you, as long as there's the recognition that, well, I know there's the recognition that finding housing is a challenge, because we're all here. But as long as the remote piece is, at least certainly to begin with, is on the table, then that assuages my concerns.
A mix.
I think if you had a shot, or if the ED had a shot at finding housing, it would be being tied into the folks in this room.
Okay.
That's
Interesting.
The community, that's what happened when I came here in 2016.
Really?
I found a place to live because somebody on the board said, hey, I got something for you. So.
That's wild. Why are they so secret? Why don't you?
Well, it's not.
well, things don't really hit the open market.
It doesn't.
They go so fast that.
Because
I see.
it is really, it's like that, it's who you know, and it's where people, like, they don't have to put an ad in the paper because they can pick up the phone and say, hey, Mary, I know you're looking for a place to live, and guess what? I have one. And so it's a place to land and be here. I didn't stay there. I stayed there for 5-6 months, and then
That's how you found the next.
Yeah.
Got it.
So.
And differently than Mary, I did put an ad in the paper.
Did you?
I advertised myself in the one ad.
Did you really?
Looking for a
It
place
worked?
to
It
live.
did, it worked, so.
Yeah.
Huh, that's so interesting.
So, this work is so much about relationships.
Yes.
So, I think some part-time remote is certainly,
Yeah. Okay.
and if there is such a thing that rather than traveling back and forth, if we can't hook you up with a place to live right away, we can help you find a place so that you don't drive back and forth. Maybe you don't go home every night. Maybe you stay up for a couple days, split it up.
Yeah, as long as there's a conversation we can have, because I want to
Yep.
be practical about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it sounds like we can be reasonable. I just want to make sure that was,
yeah.
that's just an important thing to make sure that the air is cleared on.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, one of the, you made me think of this, and I thought it would be worth sharing about relationships. My intent would be to bring the ones that I have with me.
Mm.
So I work with LISC, with One Roof, with a myriad of developers from the Twin Cities Metro, and I've been sort of courting them and hinting at the North Shore in anticipation of this opportunity. There are a couple modular builders that I'm dancing with a bit who are intrigued to do modular apartments and to do modular, which is the fastest way you can get things done. So I think that's one of the advantages, and that's one of the, to answer your question, what are the questions you didn't ask me, maybe like what relationships do you have existing in the industry? That's some of them.
So we do need to call
Yes,
for time now.
sorry.
This group is going to have some discussion and follow-up today, and I can't tell you exactly when you'll hear from someone, but it will be soon, one way or the other. Soon, it'll be, we'll see where this conversation goes next.
Mary, how would you define short-term versus long-term? Lawrence doesn't have a definition.
Nobody is more anxious to know the answer to the
Okay,
question
I'm just
than
teasing.
me.
We don't call her short-term Mary for nothing.
Good to know. Okay, no, that's very helpful.
It'll By the end of the week? Oh, yes, I think so.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to be
Today's
cognizant.
Monday? Absolutely, yeah.
Is it Monday? Wow.
Today's Monday,
What a
yeah.
long day.
All right, but we really do need to wrap it up.
Yep, I'm sorry. Thank you
You're
very
gonna-
much. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Just leave it there, Jason. We'll take care of it.
Thank
Okay.
you so much. Take care. Good to
Have a
see
good
you.
night.
I'm gonna take a quick file break.
Yes, take a break. I think we should maybe swing us around in a circle so we can have a conversation.
And Bill, are you still here with us?